You wake up. Your phone feels cold as ice in your hand. 3 screens, 3 versions of the truth. The White House posts, situation under control. TikTok explodes with shaky-voiced videos. They've been lying to you since childhood. On X, a former CIA analyst in a perfect suit whispers, "The census is chipping." Your pulse drums in your temples, a lump in your throat. Not from fear, from emptiness. You no longer know where to find the truth. Not in newspapers, not in labs, not even in the eyes of the neighbor you've shared a Sunday barbecue with for 10 years. Yesterday, he messaged the chat. They're going to mark all of us. You stay silent, because you don't know who they are, or if they even exist. Do you feel it? It's not paranoia. It's the system. It teaches you to doubt every word, every fact, every face, and it works. Pew Research. In 1971, almost half of Americans trusted people. Today, it's 1 in 3. The rest? They check every link, reread every headline, and still don't believe. Because truth has become a commodity. It's sold. It's cut into clips. It's slipped under the facts tag. And doubt? Doubt is the engine. The algorithm feeds on it, as does the entire business built around it. But here's the key. You weren't broken. You were broken down, step by step. First, Watergate. The truth turned out to be dirty. Then Iraq, with weapons that weren't there. Then the pandemic, with masks that sometimes saved, sometimes didn't. Each time, a promise of clarity. Each time, a new crack in trust. And none of this was accidental. It was a strategy. Quiet, systemic, profitable. Trust isn't just a feeling. It's social capital, the invisible glue that holds schools, courts, elections together. Without it, society turns into a crowd of lonely people with phones and fear. Look here. Imagine you hold the last thread. It doesn't lead to a conspiracy. It leads to a choice. You can remain in the void, or you can start searching, not for truth in an absolute sense, but for those who speak honestly about their doubts. Because trust isn't born in certainty. It's born in vulnerability. And yes, it's possible to get back what was lost. But first, you need to understand who stole it and how. June 1973. You're sitting at your kitchen table in a Chicago suburb. On screen, Walter Cronkite. His voice isn't shaking. He's not shouting. He just says, "The president recorded every conversation, knew everything, from the very beginning." Your wife is silent. Her fingers dig into a mug of cold coffee. You remember watching Nixon's Peace with Honor speech about Vietnam 2 years ago. You believed him, like children. And now, a recording. Not a rumor, not a theory. Proof. And in that proof, not just a lie, a betrayal, not of a spy, not of a general, of the president himself. In that moment, something inside you collapses, not loudly, without smoke, just a dull ringing, as if the last support beam fell. You can no longer look at the American flag and feel the same way. Before Watergate, trust was the norm. Not an ideal, but the norm. You could argue about taxes, about war, about rights, but you believed the system was generally honest. The government might make mistakes, but it didn't deceive. Vietnam had already started to fray at the edges. The Gulf of Tonkin turned out to be a fabrication. The Pentagon Papers proved the war was waged with cold calculation, knowing they would lose. But Watergate, that was a blow not to politics. It was a blow to the very sense of reality. If the president lies systematically, methodically, with a smile on his face, then what is truth? Newspapers, school, the vote, everything is suspect. And this isn't paranoia, it's logic. Trust didn't die on TikTok. It died in the Oval Office, where a tape recorder was turned on, documenting how power became a crime. Here's a number that hits like ice. In 1954, 73% of Americans trusted the federal government. By 1970, it was less than half. And by 2020, 20%. It never recovered. Not after Reagan. Not after Obama. Not after September 11th yet. Because trust, once broken, doesn't glue back together. It remains a crack, quiet, but deep. And through it seeps everything. Fear, cynicism, rage. You start to see conspiracy not because it exists, but because the system itself taught you they always lie. But then, who will tell the truth? In 1973, you switch the channel and see Cronkite's face. He's your last anchor, the most trusted man in America. You think, can everyone really lie at once? No. Someone has to be honest. But just 20 years later, that anchor would become an advertising slogan. The media would stop being a mirror. They would become an arena, where truth isn't the goal, but currency. And the louder the cry, the higher the price. Do you feel it? This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new game. And the rules are simple. Whoever controls attention controls reality. You work at a local newspaper in Ohio. 3 employees, a dying website, a coffee subscription. You renew it, because at least there's that. Yesterday, you wrote about the school, water, up to your knees in the gym. Photos, you in rubber boots. Quotes from parents, from the mayor, from utility workers. Today on Facebook, you're called a globalist agent simply because you quoted the mayor. You're not involved in politics. You're just writing that the water in the gym is knee-deep. But now, every word is choosing a side. The silence after a call from a reader rings in your ears. A reader who screamed, "You're lying! I was there myself. It was dry." Even though you took the photo in rubber boots yourself. Do you feel it? It's not exhaustion. It's despair. When truth becomes heavier, not because it doesn't exist, but because no one wants to listen to it anymore. Everything changed in 1987. The Federal Communications Commission removed the fairness doctrine. Before, TV had to present both sides of a debate. Now you could scream one side until you went deaf. Talk shows exploded. Loudness replaced credibility. Emotion replaced facts. Media stopped being a mirror. They became an echo, repeating what you already believed. People no longer searched for truth. They searched for confirmation. And media sold exactly that. Harvard Kennedy School, in the 90s, 55% trusted national media. Today, less than 30%. And digital platforms accelerated the decline. The algorithm doesn't want you to learn something new. It wants you to be angry, to share, to stay inside. By 2022, fact-checking had become a dirty word. Pew Research, 64% of Republicans consider fact-checking to be censorship. Imagine a tool against lies now looks like a threat to freedom. This isn't just distrust. It's a rupture with shared reality. When verifying truth seems hostile, you're no longer in society. You're in a trench, and anyone who offers common facts is an enemy. But if the media is no longer neutral, perhaps science will provide the truth. Scientists don't vote. They measure. They test. But in 21st century America, science has also become a battlefield. Vaccines, not medicine, but a marker of loyalty. Climate, not data, but ideology. Truth now depends not on the lab, but on the t-shirt you're wearing. Science, once a sacred grail, now demands faith. And this faith is distributed along party lines. Do you feel the ground slipping beneath your feet? It's not an earthquake. It's a system that has turned knowledge into a weapon. And each of us is a target. You didn't ask to be a hero. You just stood at the microphone in March 2020, with tired eyes and a folder of data under your arm, and said, "Masks save lives." You quoted The Lancet. You talked about droplets, about risk, about grandmothers in nursing homes. And the next morning, your face was on a meme. Caption, Agent Fauci. In your hometown, a rally with signs saying, "My DNA is not your lab." Your aunt texts the WhatsApp chat, "You sold out to Big Pharma." You look in the mirror and don't recognize yourself. Not because you've changed, because the world around you has turned upside down. Science, which you loved as a service, is now a marker of loyalty. A vaccine, not protection. It's a flag. And if you're not on your side, you're an enemy. Do you feel it? It's not anger. It's loneliness. When your data is rejected, not because of an error, but because it threatens someone else's identity. The brain works like a restaurant menu. It only chooses what doesn't disturb its inner peace. Cognitive psychologists call this motivated reasoning. You're not seeking truth. You're defending your tribe. And then even the purest experiment becomes propaganda. Not because it's false, but because it didn't come from your people. But here's a paradox that makes your heart stop. The most ardent conspiracy theorists are not poor or uneducated. They are people with degrees, with above-average incomes, with New Yorker subscriptions. A Stanford Observatory study hits hard. They are more likely to believe that vaccines are a weapon of control. Why? Because their distrust is not in science, but in those who represent it, in the government, in the media, in the elites who, they believe, manipulate facts for power. This is not ignorance, it is cynicism. Advanced, sophisticated, elitist. Conspiracy theory has become a form of protest, not against knowledge, but against a system that they feel has turned knowledge into a whip. Imagine you're sitting in a coffee shop, scrolling through your feed. The algorithm knows you're an educated person with critical thinking skills, and it doesn't feed you nonsense. It feeds you alternative data, with graphs, with quotes, with an air of scientific rigor. But the goal isn't to enlighten. The goal is to keep you engaged. As long as you're angry, arguing, sharing, you're inside. The truth here isn't important. Your engagement is. And then even a scientist who has dedicated their life to facts becomes a pawn in a game where victory isn't for truth, but for attention. Look here. If science, the last bastion of objectivity, no longer unites but divides, what remains? The answer isn't in the lab, it's in the code, in the algorithm that decides whose truth deserves your screen. And this algorithm isn't neutral. It learns from your fear, from your anger, from your desire to be right. It doesn't just show you the world. It shapes your ability to trust at all. And in this world, even a doctor saving lives must prove they are not a traitor. You scroll through your feed. One video about the government putting microchips in vaccines. The next, that the elections were rigged. Then that the climate catastrophe is a myth. You didn't look for this. You were just watching cat videos. But the algorithm noticed. You paused for 0.8 seconds. You liked it. You commented, "Strange." And now it knows you doubt. And it feeds that doubt. Not with facts, with emotions, with anger, with fear, with the feeling that you're one of the few who woke up. And the truth? The truth no longer matters. What matters is that you don't leave. Your fingers keep scrolling as if searching for an exit, but each swipe only pulls you deeper into the vortex of distrust. It all started in 2009 with the launch of the Facebook news feed. Before that, you sought information yourself. After, information sought you. Algorithms learned not just to show you what you like, but what triggers a strong emotional reaction, especially anger and fear, which, according to Meta's internal research, increase app time by 30 to 50%, because anger and fear keep you longer. And the longer you're in the app, the more ads you see. Engagement became the main currency, and accuracy a side effect that hinders the business model. This is how social networks turned distrust into a product, and you into a consumer of doubt. Algorithms don't just show you what you like. They teach you not to trust what you don't like. Every time you see a post that contradicts your views, the system doesn't offer an alternative. It shows how they lie, manipulate, betray, often through content labeled as exposure. This creates not just an echo chamber, but a fortified zone of distrust, where anyone who thinks differently isn't just mistaken. They're an enemy. And truth becomes not common knowledge, but ammunition. The Stanford Internet Observatory found users caught in such bubbles are 4 times more likely to believe misinformation and 5 times less likely to interact with those who hold different views. If we no longer share one reality, can we trust each other? When your neighbor believes one truth and you believe another, you are no longer just disagreeing. You are living in parallel worlds. And then not only trust in institutions collapses, the very fabric of society collapses, because trust between people is not a bonus. It is the glue that holds democracy together. And without it, we are left alone, in a world where everyone is for themselves. As Robert Putnam wrote, social capital doesn't grow on trees. It has to be cultivated. And we are cutting down the forest. Do you feel it? It's not exhaustion. It's disconnection. When your brain stops looking for truth and starts looking for confirmation that you're not a fool. And in this world, even the kind neighbor with the grill becomes a threat, because he lives in a different reality, and you no longer know how to reach him. Imagine a small town in New England, 1975, Friday evening. Men at the bowling alley aren't chasing records. They're sharing news, joking about the mayor, leaving keys with neighbors for the weekend. Women discuss books over tea. Teenagers return from scout camp with sunburned cheeks and vows of friendship. The librarian waves to everyone, calling them by name. This isn't nostalgia. This was the fabric of life. By the mid-90s, all of this began to disappear. Not with a bang, quietly. Like water draining from cracks in parched earth. Bowling alleys emptied. Not because people stopped bowling. They stopped doing it together. Robert Putnam collected data across America and saw, over 50 years, participation in unions, church groups, school boards fell by 40%. Neighbors stopped greeting each other. Community meetings drew fewer faces. Do you feel it? This isn't just loneliness. It's the breakdown of social capital. That invisible glue that held the nation together. Social capital is when you leave your child with a neighbor without trembling in fear. When you sign a petition without thinking, what if it's a trap? When you believe the cashier won't shortchange you. But since the 1970s, this capital began to melt away. According to Harvard and Pew Research, the share of those who believe most people can be trusted fell from 46 to 31%. This means 70% live in a state of chronic distrust. The world, by default, is hostile, and people are potential threats. All of this worsened when third places disappeared, cafes, libraries, churches, Spaces where a farmer and a teacher could simply talk without arguing about politics. Without them, trust doesn't weaken. It evaporates. 70%. Almost 70% of Americans today live in a state of chronic social distrust. And here's the paradox. The less you trust, the less you participate in community life. 32% less, according to Putnam. And the less you participate, the more isolated you become. And then even the neighbor on your street seems suspicious. The government, alien. Science, a tool of control. Distrust becomes a trap. Each step deeper only tightens its walls. And the attempt to get out looks like manipulation, like a betrayal of your tribe. But why did this happen? Not just because of television, not just because of algorithms. The answer is in the wallet, in money, in how wealth is distributed. When the system seems unfair, you stop believing not only in it, but also in those who participate in it. OECD studies show in societies with high inequality, trust between people falls 2.5 times faster. And this is not a coincidence. This is a law. Because fairness is the foundation of trust. And without it, even the kindest neighbor becomes a stranger. Imagine you're a worker in Youngstown, Ohio, 45 years old, 30 of them at the same factory. You paid taxes, sent your kids to school, believed if you work hard, the system will back you up. And then, fall of 2008, you're laid off, not for laziness, not for a mistake, because the banks, saved with your own tax money, decided it's cheaper to produce in Mexico. You sit by the TV, drinking cold coffee, and see how a former top executive of that very bank receives a bonus. $1,600,000. The average check, according to Congress. You're not angry, you're silent. Because for the first time, the question flashes in your mind. If the rules of the game aren't written for me, why play at all? This isn't a rebellion. It's a disconnection. Quiet, deep, irreversible. And here's what the numbers show. In states where the Gini coefficient, a measure of inequality, is above 0.45, trust in the police, schools, doctors, and newspapers drops by 38%. Harvard and the World Bank confirmed this with hundreds of thousands of people. Why? Because fairness isn't morality. It's the fuel for trust. If you feel that the system only works for those who fly on private jets, you stop believing even that water is wet. Especially if the same scientist who says vaccines save lives stays silent about your closed factory, your empty refrigerator, your fear of the future. Do you feel it? It's not cynicism. It's protection. The brain shuts down trust, just as the immune system shuts down an infected cell. And here's the paradox that makes your heart stop. The greater the gap between rich and poor, the less you trust even your neighbor. Not because they deceived you, because the system taught you everyone lies, especially those in power. Studies in nature, human behavior proved this. In unequal societies, people are less likely to help strangers, more afraid of the streets, even if crime is falling. Inequality doesn't just take money, it takes away the feeling that you are part of one world. Look here. When you're standing in line for food stamps, and on TV there's a speech about restoring trust, you don't hear an appeal. You hear mockery. And then any truth, even the most accurate, seems like manipulation, because the one who utters it has never felt the sting of an empty wallet. But can this be fixed? Can trust be cultivated in soil scorched by inequality? Yes, but not with laws, not with algorithms, but with spaces where people meet again not as enemies but as neighbors, where honest work again means more than a Wall Street bonus. Because trust is not an idea. It is a practice. And it begins where fairness stops being a dream and becomes a rule. In a small town in Vermont, 12 people sat around a single table. No phones, no slogans, just people. A Republican who wasn't vaccinated, a nurse who was vaccinated 3 times, a black veteran, a white teacher, a Latino farmer. They didn't argue. They listened. One said, "I don't trust the CDC, but I trust Janet. She saved my dog." And that's the whole point. Trust isn't born in the White House, not in a lab, not in an algorithm. It grows in the moment when you look into the eyes of someone who knows your pain. Who was there when your pipe burst? Who remembers your cat's name? Do you feel it? It's not naivete, it's a strategy. Because trust isn't logic, it's experience. And if you've lost faith in the system, you can still believe in your neighbor. The Stanford Internet Observatory proved trust in institutions is restored only through local intermediaries. Teachers, doctors, librarians, pastors, those you see at the grocery store, whose children go to school with yours, not heroes, just people who remain reliable, even when the world is falling apart. But how do you scale that? Not with fact-checking. It has already become a weapon. Not with laws. They won't touch your feed. But local journalism, it can. A reporter who lives in your neighborhood, whose face you know, whose children play with yours. They are not the media. They are part of the community. And when they write that the water in the gym is knee-deep, you believe it, because you saw them in rubber boots. Digital hygiene. It's not about prohibitions. It's about awareness. Teaching children, and yourself, to ask, who profits from my anger? What does this post want from me? To turn skepticism not into cynicism, but into a tool. And most importantly, to create spaces without weapons. Neither physical nor verbal, where you can say, "I don't know," and not be judged. Where the question is more important than the answer. Here's a hopeful number. 5 to 7% of the population is enough to start a chain reaction. Not leaders, not celebrities, just you, and me, and Janet from Vermont. But it all starts not with who to trust, but with a different question. Am I myself worthy of trust? Because trust isn't passive expectation. It's a choice. Every day, in every conversation. When you tell the truth, even if it's inconvenient, when you listen, even if you disagree. When you remain human, in a world that teaches you to be an enemy, imagine you are one of those threads. And if you don't break, you can become part of a new glue. Not perfect, but real. Look here, this isn't the end. This is an invitation. Let's piece the puzzle together. The government stopped being yours after Watergate, but definitively turned its back when its laws began to be written. Not for you, but for those whose incomes soared by 226% since 1980, while yours rose by 16. The media stopped being a mirror in 1987 when the Federal Communications Commission repealed the fairness doctrine and opened the floodgates to one-sided shouting. Science became a battlefield, not because scientists made mistakes, but because in a world where your factory closed and a banker got a $1.6 million bonus, even a vaccine looks like an order from above. Social media didn't create distrust. They packaged it into a feed where the algorithm feeds you anger, because anger keeps you longer. And inequality, it became the fuel. Do you feel it? This isn't chaos. It's a system. It doesn't break trust by accident. It dismantles it piece by piece and sells each part separately. Remember the beginning? The cold phone in your hand. 3 screens, 3 truths. You ask then who to trust. Now you know. You didn't stop believing because you became weaker. You were forced to doubt again and again, step by step, from Watergate to the algorithm, from an empty refrigerator to a meme about chips. But knowledge is already a weapon. Because now you see distrust is not your fault. It's a symptom. And you're not a victim. You're a possible cure. Like the librarian who knew everyone by name. Like Janet, whose honesty saved not only a dog, but also trust. Like you, when you write the truth, even if you're called a traitor. To ask questions means not to give up. And not to give up means to remain human. Here's a twist that makes your heart stop. Trust isn't naivete. It's an act of courage. Cynicism is a bunker. It's warm, familiar, safe. Trust is stepping outside, without a bulletproof vest, knowing you might get hurt. But only out there on the street is a common future born. Only out there democracy. Only out there us. History doesn't wait for heroes. It waits for those who will say, I will try, even if their voice shakes. Now, to you. Can you still trust anyone? Or is that door closed forever? Write in the comments, not for us. For someone who is reading this right now and thinking, maybe I'm not alone. Perhaps your words will become a bridge, not between ideologies, between people. Because trust is always about faces, about hands that helped, about a voice that didn't betray, about you.